social sciences are, of course, meant to be the study of human behavior, and indeed, because they're sciences, they're meant to be trying to understand the regularity in human behavior. And therefore, there is no doubt that one of the challenges that faces social sciences, well, actually, given the insights and understanding you have, can you actually predict human behavior? And elections are the occasion when that particular perspective, as it were, has a particular interest and attraction. And before an election and during election campaign, people do opinion polls and ask people around the country how they're going to vote, and sometimes they get it right and sometimes they get it wrong, but I'm not going to get into that this evening. But the other thing, of course, most proximate to forecasting the outcome of election is an exit poll. And that's what I've been involved in now for quite a few years. You might think this is quite simple. You know, you go and ask people how they voted and you add it up and fine. Well, it's not that simple. It's actually very peculiarly difficult in Britain. But let me first of all just remind you that actually at the last 3 or 4 elections, the exit poll has been remarkably accurate. Indeed, it's not only been accurate, it's also caused a flutter and a surprise every time we do it. So in 2010, which you'll remember was an election that was characterised by Clegmania, we said the Liberal Democrats were going to win fewer seats. Paddy Ashdown said rubbish. Actually, we slightly overestimated the number of Liberal Democrat seats. Meanwhile, we said the Tories were going to get 307, and they got 307. In 2015, actually, we weren't quite so spot on, but we said it's perfectly clear that David Cameron is going to remain Prime Minister. We thought he'd get 316 seats, then it was 331. Oh, and by the way, the Liberal Democrats are going to be down to about 8. Paddy Ashdown said, rubbish, I will eat my hat if this exit poll is correct. And duly was presented with, I think, a marzipan version of a hat the following evening by Andrew Neil. This time around, we turned up again and we said, well, actually, Mrs. May's ploy has completely backfired. We think the Tories are going to get 318 seats. In the end, they got 314 seats. In the end, they got 318. But again, the story was essentially right. We even managed to get the SNP right, almost within a seat. This time, Paddy Ashdown said, I've learnt my lesson. I will simply not say anything about this exit poll. He's finally got there. But as it happened, it proved to be remarkably accurate. Now, so the interesting thing is, every time everybody gets surprised, not quite sure why, but anyway, there we go, on the basis of this exit poll. So how is it that we've managed to come up with polls that are, for the most part, relatively accurate, even when the opinion polls are saying something different, and even when actually it's rather difficult to do exit polls in the UK? Well, why is it difficult to do exit polls in the UK? Because we're a very peculiar country. Thanks to the Victorians' concern to maintain the secrecy of the ballot when they reformed the electoral rules in the 1870s, they insist that we take ballot boxes from the polling station to a central count, and once we've made sure that there's the right number of ballot papers in each ballot box, we literally deliberately mix all the ballot boxes together and the papers from the ballot boxes before we do the count. We're peculiarly trusting. We think there's no risk at all taking a ballot box from, across the sea in Orkney or wherever and taking it to a central count. We think that's much less of a risk than counting it in a polling station. In most countries, you count the results in a polling station. And the reason why this makes it difficult for an exit poll, therefore, is that it's impossible to know whether any sample of polling stations outside which you might decide to position interviewers is actually representative of the whole country. And you have to remember, although an exit poll may interview a lot of people, this time we interviewed 30,000 people, it's in a relatively small number of places. This time we interviewed outside 144 of the many thousands of polling stations inside the UK. So the selection of the polling stations is potentially crucial. So an important insight that David Firth, a statistician in Warwick University, had about 15 years ago. He said, hang on, given the situation in Britain, we should give up on trying to do a representative sample of polling stations. Rather, what we should try to do is, instead of estimating how many votes the Tories are going to get, how many votes Labour are going to get. What we should do is simply to try to estimate how much the Tory vote is up or down, how much the Labour vote is up or down. Now, why is this useful? It's useful because the Conservative vote varies dramatically from Caithness to Cornwall. It's high in some places, it's low in others. Same is true for Labour. On the other hand, however, although it does vary to a degree across the country, the extent to which a party's vote is going up or down doesn't vary anything like as much. So therefore, any set of polling stations, if you can estimate the change in vote share rather than the level, is much more likely to tell you what's going on. And this is the crucial secret. Now, you may then be saying, so, but hang on, how can you measure change? Simple. You go back to the same polling stations at which you interviewed at the previous election. And in effect, when we talk about there being an exit poll, actually it's not a single exit poll. The central core of the exit poll methodology in the UK is to compare polling station by polling station the estimates of the shares of the vote won in those polling stations for the various parties with the same estimates we had from the exit poll previously, and that gives you a measure of change. Now, of course, this isn't always straightforward. Sometimes returning officers change their polling districts and different people are voting, etc., etc. But of course, because this time it was only 2 years since the last election, we weren't too much troubled with that, and we didn't have too many places where things had changed. In fact, we went literally back to exactly the same polling stations as we did 2 years ago and added 3 others. So that's the crucial essence of it. What we are doing is getting interviewers to stand outside, and they don't interview everybody. They get a sample of around 1 in 4, 1 in 5, 1 in 6. It depends on how many voters there are at the polling station. We're trying to get an equal number of voters per polling station. And they give them a mock ballot paper, and they say, look, would you mind filling this in exactly the same way as you've just done inside the school hall or whatever. And that information then gets phoned back to a central bureau, and it reaches the team of 6 of us that actually analyse the data. Crucial to bear in mind also, one other thing you've noticed, we do nothing about postal voters. We do literally do nothing about postal voters. But because we're estimating change rather than share, all we are assuming is that the change in party support since the last election is the same amongst postal voters as it is amongst the general population. So they may be more Conservative or more Labour, but so long as the movement is the same, we're fine. And so far, fingers crossed, it's proved to be okay. So the core of the exit poll are 144 estimates of the change in vote share in 144 non-random polling stations. They happen to be the ones we've kept on visiting, scattered across the country. Thereafter, basically, it's a statistical exercise. The first thing we can then do with that is say, well, hang on, can we spot any systematic differences between different kinds of constituencies? Is Scotland different from the rest of the UK? Well, that's virtually guaranteed these days. This time, for example, we found that constituencies, there were more than one characteristic, basically of places where Leave were relatively strong in 2015, where there are lots of graduates who again tend to vote for Remain. We're finding actually the Labour Party is doing better in these kinds of places. In places with lots of Leave voters, places with few students, the Conservatives doing better in places with lots of Leave voters. So that's one thing we're spotting. The other thing we're spotting is that for the most part, the attempts of Liberal Democrat MPs who lost in 2015 to get back in were for the most part going to fail. So you begin to identify the systematic patterns in the data. And that basically, therefore, results in a series of equations. And we say, well, if you're an equation which has got lots of graduates, and maybe there was a high Leave vote last time, then, the Conservative vote is going to increase in that kind of constituency by X%. And we have a sequence of equations for each of the parties, which gives you an estimate of the change in vote share for that party, depending on the characteristics and geographical location of that constituency, which, of course, you can then apply to the real result in that constituency last time. Ergo, you have an estimate of the change in the levels of vote share for the parties. Then one final trick. Take, for example, a constituency where, on the basis of our various statistical manipulation, we say Conservatives will get 52%, Labour will get 48%. We don't say the Conservatives are going to win that seat. There's clearly a pretty high probability that Labour will win that seat. And so and for what we actually do is we convert all those vote shares into probabilities that the parties are going to win each seat. So when you saw David Dimbleby or Tom Bradby, whoever, at 10 o'clock saying 314 Conservative seats, we didn't know exactly what the 314 were going to be. We just knew that the sum of the probabilities was 314. And gradually over the years, we've trained television presenters not to ask which of the seats of the Conservatives will gain, because although we can tell you how many they're going to win, telling you which ones they're going to win is still a wee bit more difficult. Okay, thanks very much indeed.